Welcome back everyone from around the world and welcome to the World Revolution News. Today is August the 25th, 2011. I'm Emily Pankhurst and on this episode Thomas Jefferson will be covering the unreported, as always, Federal Reserve, and the recent audit that was conducted.
Since 1954, it has been illegal to audit the Federal Reserve, which is not federal and has no reserve. But, during the last congressional session, Congress somehow managed to get an amendment added to a bill that took a peek at the Federal Reserve's finances. The results are more than revealing. Two separate bills in the House and Senate, sponsored by two of the last honest legislators we have in Congress, Senator Bernie Sanders and Independent and Republican Ron Paul, were the true patriots that initiated this audit. The first ever Government Accountability Office carried out the audit of the Federal Reserve that has taken place in the past few months. They had to water down the original language of the House bill so that a complete audit would not be carried out. Ben Bernanke, Alan Greenspan, and various other bankers vehemently opposed the audit and threatened Congress about the effects an audit would have on markets. The fear-mongering they had warned about was proven to be false, just like the threat back in 2008 when those in Congress who had voted no against the bailout bill at first, were then told that martial law would occur on Monday if it wasn't passed that Friday night. To be fair, I can understand why the Federal Reserve said an audit of itself would be very painful for the markets as a whole. They did not want the public to find what they had secretly already loaned out. What they either forgot or failed to realize is the fact that the mainstream media did not cover the audit, and if it's not reported, then it's as if it never happened. Some startling findings of a top-to-bottom audit of the Fed are the following. The Central Bank of the United States has dished out a whopping $16 trillion in 0% interest-free secret loans to bail out American and foreign banks. Of the $16.1 trillion loaned out, over $3 trillion went to financial institutions in the UK, Germany, Switzerland, France and Belgium. Additionally, swap arrangements were opened with banks in the UK, Canada, Brazil, Japan, South Korea, Norway, Mexico, Singapore and Switzerland. 12 of those arrangements are still ongoing, having been extended through August 2012. That's right, tens of trillions of dollars were printed, created, or digitally transferred and given to the banks without our knowledge. Let's try placing $16 trillion into perspective. The gross domestic product, or GDP, is the market value of all final goods and services produced in the United States in a given period, and it is $14.12 trillion or $2 trillion less. The entire national debt of the United States government spanning its more than 200-year history is $14.5 trillion and also $2 trillion less. We could have paid our debt off, or given everyone a year's salary. Instead, the Fed gave $3 trillion to foreign banks. The annual budget that was being debated so heavily in Congress and the Senate concerning the debt ceiling was around the same amount given to foreign banks at $3.5 trillion. As a component of the government's measures to address the subprime mortgage crisis, then-President George W. Bush signed into law on October 3, 2008 the TARP Troubled Asset Relief Program. Subsequently, loans of $800 billion were given apparently to failing banks and companies. Senator Sanders went on to say, that was a blatant lie, considering the fact that Goldman Sachs alone received $814 billion. As it turns out, the Federal Reserve donated $2.5 trillion to Citigroup, while Morgan Stanley also received over $2. The Royal Bank of Scotland and Deutsche Bank, a German bank, also split about $1 trillion. As a result of this audit, we now know that the Federal Reserve provided more than $16 trillion in total financial assistance to some of the largest financial institutions and corporations in the United States and throughout the world. End quote. Sanders, in a posting on the web on July 21, 2011, also said that this is a clear case of socialism for the rich and rugged, you're on your own individualism for everyone else. No agency of the United States government should be allowed to bail out a foreign bank or corporation without the direct approval of Congress and the President. He also went on to say, the nonpartisan, investigative arm of the U.S. Congress also determined that the Fed lacks a comprehensive system to deal with conflicts of interest, despite the serious potential for abuse. In fact, according to the report, the Fed provided conflict of interest waivers to employees and private contractors, so they could keep investments in the same financial institutions and corporations that were given emergency loans. For example, the CEO of J.P. Morgan Chase served on the New York Fed's board of directors at the same time that his bank received more than $390 billion in financial assistance from the Fed. Moreover, J.P. Morgan Chase served as one of the clearing banks for the Fed's emergency lending programs. In another disturbing finding, the Government Accountability Office said that on September 19, 2008, William Dudley, who is now the New York Fed president, was granted a waiver to let him keep investments in AIG and General Electric at the same time they were given bailout funds. One reason the Fed did not make Dudley sell his holdings, according to the audit, was that it might have created the appearance of a conflict of interest. To Sanders, the conclusion is simple. No one who works for a firm receiving direct financial assistance from the Fed should be allowed to sit on the Fed's board of directors or be employed by the Fed. A more detailed investigation into potential conflicts of interest at the Fed is due out on October 18, but Sanders said one thing already is abundantly clear. The Federal Reserve must be reformed to serve the needs of working families, not just CEOs on Wall Street. When you have conservative Republican stalwarts like Jim DeMint and Ron Paul, as well as self-identified Democratic socialists like Bernie Sanders, all fighting against the Federal Reserve, you know that it is no longer an issue of liberal versus conservative. When you have every single member of the Republican Party in Congress, and progressive congressmen like Dennis Kucinich, sponsoring a bill to audit the Federal Reserve, you realize that the Federal Reserve is an entity unto itself, which has no oversight and no accountability. The Fed doesn't have a requirement to comply with the recommendations, but its political position and independence are not exactly secure at the moment. Too big to fail should actually be too rich to fail. As Americans continue to get crushed for speculating on housing and the stock bubble, then the elite get us to pay for their losses. This kleptocracy is a way of life, and if the American people understood the entire scope of this perverse crime, there would be revolution in the morning. And not just here in America, this money went all over the world to prop up the United Banking Cartel. The world is enslaved by debt and the wars they fund. We deserve better than this. We really do. Whatever happens today at Jackson Hole with Ben Bernanke will surely rock the markets either way, but how long do we allow this to happen is up to us. So until next week, tell everyone you know that it's the United Banking Cartel versus us, not me versus you, for we are the many, and they are the few.
Have a good weekend, everyone.